Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk FM. Today it's with great pleasure that I have Michael from Metrikus and Francesca from AirRated, and we will be discussing air quality. Good morning, both. I hope you're both well.
Morning, Adam.
Morning. Sorry, we had a bit of a technical hiccup there. You're still muted. So good morning.
Morning.
We know that the air quality is a subject that's been growing sort of in importance over the last couple of years, and people have been taking more attention to it when creating office spaces, and actually when they're looking at new offices. I mean, what I feel that people aren't always sure of is what the impact of poor air quality sort of has on the person and the workplace. I mean, Francesca, can you talk us through sort of the impact that it has on people and the business in general?
Yeah, of course. So when we're looking at indoor air quality, there are two things we should really take into account, which is one, yes, the impact on health and well-being, you're absolutely right, but also the less well-documented, less well-known impact on productivity. So on the health and well-being front, you've got things like PM2.5, so very fine dust, volatile organic compounds from cleaning fluids that are used in the space, and the off-gas from finishes. And they can really irritate the lungs, the airways. So in the short term, you get like dry, itchy eyes, dry, scratchy throat. In the long term, it can cause respiratory distress and disease. But then the other side of it is productivity. So elevated levels of carbon dioxide in the workplace can impact cognitive performance and therefore productivity. And I think it's also really important to take into account that temperature and humidity are considered important elements of indoor air quality, aside from the common pollutants that you'll hear about being carbon monoxide, maybe nitrogen dioxide, because they impact the rate at which chemicals are released from the building materials and so on. So there's the health and well-being aspect, of course, productivity, but also comfort, which is quite overlooked. So this is like how you feel in the workplace. And the BASIS, the Building Engineering Services Association, commissioned their own study, which found that 70% of people complain about indoor air quality. So it's something that is notably impacting how people feel from day to day, and is impacting it in a way that's not really the black and white health and well-being productivity implications, but is having a serious impact on how they feel day to day.
It's something we just talked about, wasn't it? Off air. So the impact that working in different locations and offices has had on me personally. So it's something that you do experience. I feel, it does drive you to be more tired and feel more fatigued as the day goes forward. And it then you are looking to get out of the space and sort of re-get the fresh air going. And it's just a really interesting one. I mean, because when we look at all of the impact of health and safety, and we look at sort of what leads to sort of legal cases within the workplace. I mean, have we seen any legal cases come forward due to poor air quality in the working environment? Has anything gone that far yet?
Not in buildings that we've seen, but there was the case in Paris about the young girl who was her mother sued Paris for poor air quality because her daughter died. So there is an outside case for outdoor air quality, but not indoor. We've had a couple of instances where we put indoor air quality sensors in an office in Manchester on behalf of a customer, and then after a few weeks they stopped paying their rent, and they didn't pay their rent for quite some time because air quality was so bad. So CO2 was up in some of their meeting rooms at about 2,500 parts per million. And at 1,000 parts per million, it's the equivalent of having 2 pints of beer. So, the higher it gets, the worse it gets. Lots of people complained, what you were talking about before we were live on the call, about feeling tired and lethargic in the afternoon. We put the sensors in all over the office, and they were up to 3,800 parts per million during some days. So We haven't heard of any legal cases, but we have another instance where another customer of ours is putting indoor air quality sensors in because the landlord says they've made some adjustments, but they don't think they've been done. So not legal, but people are, and tenants are becoming much more aware of this now. We've got lots of customers doing this, and actually we've now got some of the landlords coming to us saying, you know, Metrikus, AirRated, can you help us with indoor air quality, because people are asking us more about, and this was happening pre-COVID. Now we're in this space where, as you know, I'm in the office now. I'm in the office every day doing demos at the moment because people are really picking this up as a subject. So no legal cases that we're aware of internally. It may have happened in other countries, something that may not have made the news, but there are instances where people have stopped paying their rent, and it took 6 months to the landlord in Manchester to fix the problem before the tenant would pay rent again.
Wow. Okay. So we can see that there's some kind of financial sort of impact that contributed to this. So how do we sort of rank this against other sort of health and safety issues? You know, so illness and I guess even and death, because what we've got to sort of be able to, in my mind, put this in, you know, sort of our risk category and hierarchy to understand when we need to challenge this over other sort of impacts. So any insight into how we can actually at the moment rank this, rank poor air quality against other health and safety issues?
Yeah, so I mean, specifically looking at indoor air quality, globally it contributes to 3% of deaths. So 1.6 million deaths globally every year are as a result of poor indoor air quality, contributing to those premature deaths. When we're looking at the UK specifically, it contributes to 20,000 premature deaths. So I know the daily death count is all to do with COVID at the moment, but to make it relatable, that's around 54 deaths a day that are attributed to poor indoor air quality. So, and actually to put that into reference, because yesterday I was thinking like what is going to be relatable to people. The same number of people are killed or seriously injured in road traffic accidents every year. So that is a comparison that can be drawn between the two. So that's the kind of numbers that we're looking at. And I think, yeah, so Michael was saying, and he's completely right, there's no regulation around the quality of indoor air. It's mainly the promotion of best practice. There are recommendations, there's guidance set by industry bodies. But something like BREEAM used to be guidance, and now it's mandatory in new build schemes. So I don't think we would be wrong to assume that it's going to go a similar way with indoor air quality. I think the only thing at the moment, I think like the closest things are the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Occupiers Liability Act, which have an element of duty of care in them to provide a safe and healthy environment to work in. And also the approved code of practice, which goes alongside the workplace regulations, states that indoor air quality should be at least equal to, but ideally better than, the outdoor air quality. And that takes into account things like PM 2.5, so that fine dust that I mentioned earlier, and temperature. So I think there is definitely a case for things to be pushed into the legal realm. And I mean, they've already seen, like Michael said, like not necessarily in the UK, but definitely in the US, where I think lawsuits are more commonplace. They've definitely seen cases over there with occupants filing against owners suing insurance companies and contractors suing suppliers. Anyone who has anything to do with a building is getting involved in this, because at the moment there's no onus on any one particular part of that life cycle of the building that this falls on. So I think people are just playing the blame game, and they'll go for whoever they can currently.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I have really noticed, and you've touched on a few there. Sort of, it is an area that I-class is full of sort of acronyms, I guess, with you know, AQI, and I think it's PM10-2.5 and PM 2.5. You know, realistically, what is it that we should be aware of when we are entering discussions to understand air quality, and what do these mean, so we can just help people understand if they're looking to implement something within their workplace, what's really important for them to be looking out for?
So AQI like you mentioned, is air quality index. So this is something that's applied to the outdoor environment. So DEFRA is a UK body that have an air quality index, and they look at 6 species of pollutant in the outdoor atmosphere, and then they rank it on a scale of 1 to 10. Now, we use the scale 1 to 10, but if you look at somewhere like China or India, they use a completely different system. So in India, it's 0 to 500. In the US, it's 0 to 500. There's no standardization of these things, which is very frustrating, seeing as there's a lot of emphasis put on outdoor air quality, yet we still don't have that frame of reference. Because if we're looking at an 8 from the UK versus a 33 in the US, I don't know how we're supposed to cross-compare the two, particularly because they both use different systems to get to that number as well. So some will take into account all these different species and average them out. Others will just pick the dominant species and then rank that one. So it's completely, there's no standardization. There really should be. When it comes to the indoor environment, I think because we're starting from scratch, it's almost going to be a lot easier. It's just we need to get ahead of the game now. So, I mean, self-promotion, but with AirRated, that's what we are aiming to do, is set the global benchmark for indoor air quality. And it will have standardization. It will take into account the kind of global picture. So set it up against ASHRAE, which is a US standard, CIBSE, which is a UK standard, and all these different things. So we need to see that standardization, and also something that's monitoring the same pollutants. So like you said, with PM10, PM2.5, so it's just, those are different types of different sizes of particulate matter, so dust. So PM10 is particulate matter with a diameter of 10 microns or less, and PM2.5, which is the really dangerous one, is fine dust matter, so particulate matter with a diameter of 2.5 microns or less, which again, to make it, to put it into context, is 3% of the width of a human hair. So completely invisible to the naked eye, but it is there. But yeah, when we're looking to monitor spaces and define that standard and that way of looking at environments, we need to make sure that we're monitoring the same things. So I think, yeah, a standard and a set of standards is the way to go. At the moment, the closest you would get is, I mean, there are health and wellbeing standards out there, like the WELL standard, FitWell, which have aspects of air quality that they look at, but aren't necessarily focusing in on just those. At AirRated, we just focus in on air quality. But again, it's finding that thing, it's being able to make it translatable, easily communicable to people, because like you said, it's loads of acronyms and people get so overwhelmed by it that they're like, look, I just want to know if I've got good air quality or not. That's all. So having that kind of badge to tell you that it's good is what we need.
So realistically, if we have a high level from what you've just explained, if we have a high level of PM 2.5s within our working environment, these are the ones that we should be more concerned around. These are the ones that we should be looking to reduce that number as much as possible.
Absolutely. So PM 2.5 is just that really fine dust. It doesn't matter whether it's organic stuff, so just pat dander and all that sort of thing, or inorganic, which is like construction dust. Doesn't matter which of the two it is. It can get really deep down into the lungs and into the bloodstream and really start aggravating things like asthma and other respiratory conditions, and can lead to COPD and emphysema in the long term. So it is one of the things that, I mean, the World Health Organization have said that there is no safe level of PM 2.5. So they've set their guidance at 10 micrograms per cubic meter, but they've actually stated that there's no safe level. They're thinking about revising it down to 4, but for now it's set at 10. So I think getting that down as low as we can, it will never reach 0 unless you're in a particularly controlled environment. So in normal environments, you're never going to reach 0, but getting that as low as you can is definitely what you should be doing. It's one of the most harmful ones. And every 1 microgram per cubic meter above 10 can cause, if you're exposed to that for a long period of time, can cause the life expectancy to drop by a year.
Okay, so I mean that I think that helps people focus on what it is they've got to look out for when going into sort of starting that journey of monitoring air quality and the impact it has. I mean, Michael, on your side, because I know that your system is here to monitor the air quality. In your experience, I mean, how big an issue is this across the offices that you go and test? I mean, are we talking about a small fraction overall? Are we talking that it massively increases with a regional basis? So, do you find more sort of offices in London with poor air quality versus, maybe Hampshire as an example? How big an issue is this across the board when you're out testing?
We've not been to a perfect building yet when we stick indoor air quality monitors in, but there are some good buildings in London. There are some very good buildings in London. There are some great buildings outside of London. But when you put the indoor air quality monitors in, because they do monitor more than the typical BMS does, BMS will monitor temperature, humidity, and CO2. Some of them do dust, but when you put a specific sensor in, and we put quite a few throughout the offices that we do to give a good heat map, so you can see the coverage, because north, south, east, and west in the building, depending on the season we're in, and depending on the time of day, there's hot and cold spots. But filtration systems or filters play one of the biggest parts in it, and we see lots of buildings with high dust and high CO2. So I think one of the buildings we did with AirRated, one of the ones we're about to do in Belgium, they'll probably get a very good score, but they have gone all out with their building management and their HVAC systems. But we've had some customers where Francesca and I were doing a piece of research for a customer, and it was as dusty inside the building as it was outside the building, and they thought they'd had HEPA filters installed, which they had paid for, but apparently hadn't made it from the storeroom into the units. So it does depend on where you are in the country and where you are in a city, but maintenance and probably preaching to the converted here, the maintenance regimes are massively important. We've got the Met Office as a customer of ours for Metrikus and AirRated, and we did AirRated for them. And after a week, Francesca was looking at their data and said, "You've got an issue with humidity. Would you like to try and address that before we keep monitoring?" And Ralph, the head of buildings there, he said, "Thanks for letting me know." Spent a week or two, Francesca, maybe, and they addressed the issue. And then we started monitoring again, and their humidity was bang on where it should be. So it really does depend on the building. Even if you think you've got a great building, and the Met Office is a fantastic building, but they were unaware of that humidity issue because they didn't have as many humidity sensors as we deployed as part of the project. So you do see some good buildings and some obviously some bad buildings, but there is no perfect building, and no one can ever expect there to be a perfect building. But one of the things we've seen and we see continuously is when we're putting these things in for whether it's the owner or the landlord or it's the tenant, whoever it might be, it does start to uncover what's going on with the HVAC systems, whether they're filtrations or whether the filters are being changed, how dusty it is and how humid it is. I know in a lot of buildings in London, from talking to our customers, so very large pharmaceutical, for example, they decommissioned their humidifiers a few years ago, and based on what we did, they are now ramping those back up. We've got another customer in Canary Wharf, and they've done the same thing. When we put the sensors in, we said, "Look, your humidity levels are really quite low. Have you decommissioned your humidifiers as well?" Well, we didn't say as well, but we said, "Have you decommissioned them?" And they said, "Yes, we actually have." So people do different things, but I think maintenance regimes are massively important. And I know this is talking to FM teams, and they do this, but it is, you don't realize how big an impact it actually does have.
But that's again, it's how to monitor good maintenance on a very important part of your building. Because that was one of the questions I had, and you've covered it brilliantly there, is what's the key ingredients to create good air quality within a working environment. Now, as we know, the UK has heavily gone to recirculating air at the moment, especially in large buildings, and that's obviously going to have an impact. And I've been an absolute fan of fresh air for a long time, in the fact that it saves energy, so it saves cost to have fresh air coming into the building, and obviously it just produces a much nicer environment to be in. You were saying there, so I'm guessing from my point of view, every building can be studied, and pretty much most can have an improvement done to them over a period of time. And it's interesting to talk about humidity, because that's something that's coming out with COVID-19 as well. The connection of humidity, and I'm not going to say I'm an expert, and Francesca, you might be able to help me here, but there's overlaying a humidity level into the chances of that being spread within an office environment as well.
Yeah, so there are a couple of aspects to this. So drier environments will dry out your mucous membranes. It's kind of a disgusting topic, but it will dry out your mucous membranes, which is your body's natural defense to viruses. So you're more susceptible in drier environments to picking up viruses like COVID-19. There are other viruses out there, so even the common cold or the flu. And then the other aspect is how humidity impacts the virus itself. So the virus is physical being. So it can promote the survival rate of the virus if the humidity is too low or too high. So below 30 or above 70. So there are definitely two aspects that we're looking at. One is the direct impact on the human body, but also the impact on the virus itself. So yeah, you're completely right. Humidity has become one of the hot topics in the built environment as a result of looking at COVID-19.
So I suppose this comes into, we were talking about the reliance on recirculating of air, and I know it's something that we sort of touched on a little bit off air, which was extraction of fresh air and extraction of the recirculated air. And there's been some thoughts around these areas of the buildings are possibly going to lead themselves to being higher contaminated areas across the board. So for COVID-19, obviously the forefront of everybody's mind, but the common flu and other kind of coronaviruses getting into the airstream and moving down that area. And if you're sitting, I guess the layman's term for me is downwind, in an office environment, you've got more chance of being infected by what's happening within the office space. Do we think there's any reality in that thought process? And during sort of at the moment with COVID-19, do we feel that the extraction points from the building should be taken into consideration where people are sitting and an office environment, or is it too early to tell any of this? I'll go to any of you, Francesca or Michael.
Francesca's the expert in this part.
No, I think in theory, yes, there could potentially be a hotspot where you've got air being exhausted from the building, particularly if the system is ineffective in some way. But there have been computational fluid dynamic models created to show airflow in a building. And if the virus, as there is growing evidence to support, can remain airborne for greater periods of time than we initially thought, particularly if there's lower humidity, then it's going to stay airborne for longer, then yes, I think there could be a hotspot and potentially sort of a funnel, like the neck of a funnel where it needs to go out of the exhaust, but in that particular area, there is going to be a hotspot. I think that's...
And this comes to the advice that I've been giving people, which is you really need to understand how the air flows in and out of your building, and how much fresh air versus recirculated air you've got. Where you're inpulling fresh air versus the extraction of fresh air, how that's being managed. Because I think we're concentrating on people movement, which is absolutely the right thing at the moment, because distance is key and how you get them around the building. But also overlaying that the HVAC systems that you've got in place, it's got to be the next level above, before you start even looking at partitions and other kind of temperature sensors. You've got this piece of equipment that can really help you or hinder you. And the investment and the time should be spent understanding what that does. And I guess, Michael, this is where your sensors, I guess, and some of your work can really help an office understand what's happening every day, I guess.
Yeah, and we're working with our existing customers, and actually we're working with a new customer at the moment. They are doing a huge what's the right word? They're doing a big review of their HVAC systems and their humidifiers as well. And we are about to deploy in just one of their floors, I think it's about 55 indoor air quality sensors to give them a detailed heat map of what's going on. So there are a lot of people talking to us at the moment because they are doing HVAC reviews. And you're right, the HVAC is probably one of the first places to start, and people should start. And we are helping customers looking at that and putting indoor air quality sensors in, giving them the detailed heat map on everything, temperature, humidity, CO2, dust, VOCs, volatile organic compounds. We happen to do light and noise as well. They don't really affect the virus, but all the other bits do. And once they've done the HVAC review, I mean, the good thing is we put the sensors in straight away, then they get a baseline of their indoor air quality. Then when they make all the changes to the HVAC system, they can see the improvement in air quality. And a lot of our customers are doing that to show the people to show their staff and their teams that actually we are doing something. We are trying to make incremental steps towards better air quality for you coming into the office. But a BMS review, a HVAC review, they are being done, and one of our partners is becoming very busy doing those. But a lot of our customers, and I said the new one, that's the first place they're going because of, the transmission of the virus.
I mean, this is all about building trust again, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
To be able to advertise the air quality within your environment and understand how that fits in the parameters of possibly contamination, not just for COVID-19. And it's obviously where we are at the moment.
Yeah.
But we're talking about seasonal flu. We're talking about colds. Creating good air and good air quality within an office environment has a lasting impact, as we spoke about earlier. But even more at the moment, if you can advertise good results, if you can show your staff good results, that's going to just build trust.
It does, yeah, it does. And we see that. So the Met Office is a prime example. Public sector organization can't give everyone big bonuses and pay them lots more money, although they'd love to. They can't because of government regulations. So they're making big steps. HEPA filters being put in, for example. They've got Metrikus rolled out across their estate. They've got an air score. They're doing everything they can to show their teams that they care about their health and well-being, and they're making big steps with their systems. And now some of our other customers in the finance area, which you wouldn't thought would be taking those big strides, have actually have come into it and are running at pace to get that done as well.
Michael, just for people listening to understanding, you said twice there sort of HEPA filters.
Yes.
What makes them different to the standard air conditioning filters, and why should people be considering looking at installing them?
So I'll let Francesca handle that. She is the expert. I know what a HEPA filter is. How it all works inside and out, I'll leave that to the expert.
No problem.
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it as layman as I can, but a HEPA filter is just a more finely woven filter, so it can trap more dust. Because PM 2.5 is the primary thing that it will be filtering out. So you pull in outdoor air, and it needs to be filtered before it goes indoors. Because like Michael said, if you keep pulling in outdoor air, but you're not filtering it, the dust inside is just going to accumulate and be trapped inside. So it can be up to 2 to 5 times more polluted, which is one of those quotes that's banded around for indoor air quality. The filter is a fantastic filter to use. However, it's not necessarily appropriate. So whenever we look at a site or we're consulting on a project, we will look at what is appropriate for that particular geographical location. So if you had a building in the Lake District versus a building in the centre of London, you're not going to need a HEPA filter on the Lake District one. Plus the fact putting a HEPA filter on might restrict airflow, increase energy consumption, then you start getting penalised for sustainability things. So actually, when it comes to the implementation of higher grades of filter, which yes are better at filtering out things like PM 2.5, we do need to work hand in hand with sustainability teams. So it's less of a health and wellbeing versus sustainability, and it's more a collaboration between the two teams.
So clearly they have some good benefits,
Yes.
but in the right circumstances. So again, working with understanding your air quality, understanding what it is that's happening within the building, will point you whether you would need to install a product like that and gain the benefits from it. So,
exactly. Sorry, Adam.
No, go on.
And looking at the outdoor air quality versus the indoor air quality, and then the environmental and behavioural aspect. So what is the use of space, how are people using it, and also the M&E side of things as well. Having that whole picture is how you diagnose the problem, and then you're able to create a solution bespoke to that particular problem.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you'll just be putting a filter on because you've assumed that it's because you've got high levels of PM 2.5 outside, whereas in actual fact it might be an indoor source, but you haven't been able to diagnose that because you've just done it under the assumption that better filters will decrease the levels of PM 2.5. So it's really having to look at the full picture, because yes, there's a lot of focus on outdoor air quality, less so on indoor air quality, but we don't want to then focus purely on indoor air quality and neglect everything else. So it's really getting that picture to be able to get the best solution.
So I think this comes on to our next subject, because obviously me at Pure Gym, wearables was becoming a big thing. Air monitoring was becoming again, just personal air monitoring was a growing marketplace. I remember when I saw them first, they were kind of boxes that had to sit on desks, and now they're kind of the size of a keyring in essence. And it's not going to be very long until we see that probably on your watch or something else. And people talk about quality of these pieces of equipment, but at the end of the day, they're going to give somebody a rating. And as we know through this period as well, the focus on being able to refuse to come to work because you don't believe that the environment is safe is a growing concern to businesses, because that's why they have to engage with their staff, build that trust and make them understand what's going on because of the anxiousness of people coming back into work. I can see this kind of becoming a bigger thing over the next few years. I mean, what are your thoughts on sort of that technology and wearable? Is it accurate? How do you feel that area is going to grow, and what impact is going to have on building managers?
So I think one of the things that is happening is these units, and we've got many around the office, all of them unfortunately out of arm reach for me at the moment, but people will start to bring these devices in to the offices themselves, and they will put them on their desk, and then that will give them a benchmark, and the person they work for or the company they work for a benchmark. Now, whether it's a good device or not, whether it's really accurate or not, they're still setting a benchmark in the business to say, I've got an indoor air quality monster. I bought it off Amazon and it cost me £45 or £20 or whatever it might be. Temperature and humidity are generally accurate, but the dust and the CO2 and others might not be. But that's starting to force building owners and companies and landlords to pay attention. There are more and more devices coming out into the market. It is a huge and growing space. It's important that you have a device that's either fit well or reset certified, that it self-calibrates, that it has individual sensors in it, because some of the sensors on the market calculate CO2. They don't actually have an individual sensor, so they're not very accurate. But more and more people, and Francesca, has one herself that is, kind of, the size of a small glass that you can carry around, that will have a battery that will last kind of a week or more, and you just plug it back in and recharge it. These are becoming more and more prevalent, and people are using them themselves. We've got a customer who one of the reasons they started to work with us is because a lady brought in her own sensor. We knew what it was. It wasn't very accurate. We then brought better sensors in for them, and they've put them everywhere now. So it is growing, and it's growing faster and faster. And especially, because of COVID, it's growing even, it's growing faster than I think anyone thought it would.
And I suppose just going on to Joshua's question, because businesses are talking about this as people will be bringing these in to understanding the health impact. But I guess one of the great things is understanding the business impact of having good health and air quality. So what evidence is there that's linking good air quality to productivity? Is there anything that actually links all of that?
Yeah, there is. So I think for such a long time, health and wellbeing initiatives were seen as a nice to have, and there was no quantitative benefit of having good, healthy environments. So there were studies done by Harvard. So it was a 3-phase study. First phase was a lab-controlled experiment that had different CO2 levels and looked at the impact on cognitive performance of 24 participants. But then obviously that is a lab-controlled environment, 24 participants. They needed to see how that played out in the real world. So phase 2 was monitoring 10 offices across the US and doing the same thing, looking at CO2, looking at the impact on cognitive performance, and that can be translated into productivity loss or gain. And then the final phase now is the global study, which is still ongoing, and the results are due out in the next year or so. But that has been able to quantify the benefit of better air quality. So levels of CO2 closer to outdoor levels of around 400 or 500 parts per million are seen to have a much better impact on cognitive performance than levels of conventional office spaces, which are around 1,000 parts per million. And like Michael said earlier, to make it relatable, that has the same impact on cognitive performance as having 2 pints of beer. So with this study that was done by Harvard, it was looking at lots of different aspects of what people are doing, the activities they're doing at work. So anything from basic functions, so proofreading of a document, up to crisis response and decision making, information seeking, information usage. So all of those different things, and looking at the impact on each of those individual tasks. So yes, they have been able to quantify it. There's a very nice website called CogFX if anyone's interested in looking at the facts and figures behind it. But theoretically, there is an 8% increase in productivity if you can lower your CO2 from 1,000 to 600 parts per million.
Yeah, I mean, that's would be an amazing result for any business, just based on sort of looking at a healthy working environment. I remember, and I can't remember being somewhere where someone sort of sat around the boardroom. It took about 45 minutes to half an hour in the boardroom to the CO2 levels to go to a certain point. And then they were making really big business decisions in air quality, and their personal reaction to it was like having 2 pints of lager, 2 pints of beer. So they're actually making decisions with being impacted, which can't be a great thing.
And I think in 2017, 2018, Lloyd's banned daytime drinking for this reason. People were going out at lunchtime, having a couple of pints of beer, coming back, and their decision-making capabilities were being impaired, and they were making poor decisions. It's bizarre that we know that there's a similar impact with elevated levels of CO2, yet there is no legislation around it. There are no rules around it. There's guidance, but that's as far as it goes. And no one is taking it with the same seriousness as something like a drinking ban.
I think, in all honesty, I think it's coming. I mean, I think the technology is increasing. I think people's awareness themselves is increasing. This is why when we were going to put this on, I think it had quite a bit of impact to the wider FM community in different countries and different locations that have tuned in. I mean, one of the things that you might be able to help with, before we close out the session, we've been talking about getting in fresh air. We've been talking around looking at HVAC systems, and then we've been talking about the impact of air movement with the spread of viruses. Through any of your experience, how do we create fresh air in our offices, we've creating too much airflow, and actually becoming the environment actually becoming worse when in this kind of situation where we could be spreading viruses without knowing about it. Have you got any hints and tips for the people listening?
Francesca, I'll let you take that one.
Okay, so thought you were going to take it because it was about air purification, but
yeah, I can.
There we go.
It depends. Well, it depends. It depends on what people want to do, right? So there, you can get fresh air by bringing in more fresh air with your HVAC system, which is what one of our new customers is doing. But at the same time, you can put to clean the air within a building, you can put air purification units in. So, you know, the building management systems and the HVAC systems, they don't purify air. But what a lot of people are now doing, and our customers are doing, and we're supplying to them, are air purification units. So that does clean the air that's in the building. So or in a floor. You do obviously floor by floor. If you don't do every floor, then you're not cleaning every floor and every space. But as well as the HVAC changes and bringing in more fresh air, so not just doing the recirculated air, but bringing in more fresh air through the system, but then putting some air purification units in, I think that's probably a good mix and a good balance. Because if you do, as you said, if you bring in too much fresh air, and you know, your energy bills will go way up. So it's finding that balance, and actually we're working with a customer at the moment to find out what's the right balance for them for changing their air handling and their fresh air circulation with the amount of air purification units we put in.
So these air purification units separate to the air conditioning systems and air circulation systems, they sit independently within the office space?
They do, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that's a really important thing.
No, go for it.
I was just saying, I guess that's really important for people, that systems are reliant on air circulation a lot more than being able to bring in high quantities of fresh air.
Yes. Yeah. And the units we're working with and the company we're working with, they're a bunch of Oxford professors. One of them runs the inorganic lab there, and another one's been a professor in computer science and engineering for a long time. They can change these units to put them into HVAC systems, but the cost of retrofitting them into a system is vast, which is why they made them mobile units. Because, you know, even prior to COVID, if you said to someone you have to change your HVAC unit in the ceiling and you need to rip part out and put something in, the cost of even if it's a false ceiling with ceiling tiles like we have in our office, there's still the costs start to add up quite quickly. There's more energy being used from those units themselves. Whereas if you can quickly deploy these units, turn them on, and they can start affecting the air immediately, the cost of deployment is far cheaper. The energy consumption of these devices is very low. And then changing the filters, which you need to do, is much easier if a bunch of engineers can and come in and do it at floor level rather than have to do it above the ceiling, out of hours, all that sort of stuff. So there's science and economics behind why these units are built the way they've been built at the moment.
But I also think that some physical presence of things that are happening, again, enables people to build trust.
Yes.
So these hidden up in the ceiling, you know, I kind of get that from an aesthetic point of view. But at this precise moment, if you've got to go down that route and you've got to install these units, it's probably in my mind, it's a good thing that they're on show. It proves to people that you're doing something and in looking after their well-being. So I think that's great. We've got a question come in from Michael. I know we're going over a bit, but this is a big subject. Which air quality monitors would you recommend? You mentioned that Francesca had a rechargeable one. So, Michael, forgive me, I think this is on a personal basis, or sort of a wearable. What would you recommend?
So it depends on what parameters you want to measure, which indoor air quality sensors you would use. So we work with a company called Disruptive Technologies. They've got tiny little Scrabble size temperature sensors which work brilliantly and last 15 years. If you want an all-in-one sensor, that is combined and will do lots of different things. So temperature, humidity, CO2, dust, and VOCs. You would look at something like an Aware Omni or a Yoo-Hoo. Both of those units are quite good. The Aware comes with the benefit of having a battery. So if you do need to unplug it, it's not going to turn off straight away. It has a few hours of battery. We are aware that we're working with a company outside of, well, not outside of the UK. Well, it is outside the UK, in Spain. They're trying to build a sensor to come to market as well. But at the moment, I would say probably the Awares from a commercial standpoint, because they've got different deployment models within buildings. So from an air quality sensor, that's probably the one. The air purification units is the ones that we're working with, and we've looked globally at these. Would be something called a HATL, Healthy Air Technologies unit, which has got the best reviews, some scientific reviews in the market.
Yeah,
the most personal one.
Yeah, so the one that I've got at the moment is called a Plume Labs sensor. So yeah, it's just the size of a dongle, and it's got a strap, because on their website they show people having it on their handbags, taking it into work, just having it on their desk. It's a great little device. I again don't know how accurate it is, just got it, so need to do all the in-house testing that I want to do with it. But even if it is no good, it's still data that I'm receiving. So I could go to an employer and say, this is my data, where is yours to counter this? Because mine is reading poor indoor air quality, which is not necessarily the case. But unless you have the data to counter that, then you almost don't have a leg to stand. You're in the back foot at that point.
So just following off so Michael's next question that's come through. So we've covered obviously what we would use in an office environment. We've covered what we'd be using personally. If I was so for me, I'm on an FM looking after multiple sites. If I wanted to go into a site to get an immediate reading and to understand whether I need to go further with this, what can I take? What's kind of more portable size that I could take to site and actually use for surveying purposes?
So there are really good monitors, and we're getting one in the post soon. So Honeywell do a lot of single gas detection sensors, which are sort of this size. You can clip them onto your belt, your utility belt, if you're a facilities manager, and you can sort of go around and monitor single pollutants. I think for multi-parameter devices, they do tend to be larger. So it'd be like a small box, or if you wanted something lab grade, it's going to be a massive wheel-in piece of kit. So it depends on what you're monitoring. But if it was just nitrogen dioxide or carbon monoxide for health and safety purposes, there are little monitors that you can just clip onto your belt.
And I think also and if you're trying to go in and get an immediate measurement, so trying to go in and get the temperature measurement, you need the handheld devices, like the laser ones as well, to give a quick snapshot. If you're trying to understand what's going on in the environment around you, you do need to take a sensor in and leave it there for a little bit of time, because if you've taken it out of your briefcase or toolbox or whatever it might be, for example, then it needs a little bit. All these devices need a little bit of time to calibrate, because you're shifting them from one environment to another. You've got lots of handhelds that do one parameter, as Francesca said, so NO2, temperature, humidity, CO2. There are those ones that are specific, and they're very high grade. None of these things are cheap if you want high accuracy. But those ones that give you an instant, here's the temperature, that they're handheld devices. They do run on a battery, and you just plug them back in. But if you wanted to go into a space like our office is not huge, it's 1,500 square feet. I've got 2 meeting rooms and an open space. My 2 meeting rooms are very different temperatures, so you would need to go in, leave it in one for half an hour, leave it in the other for half an hour, just so they can calibrate and start to pick up what's actually going on in the environment, especially the multi-sensor.
That's really good advice for everybody. I mean, because that's the kind of information they need to be able to go and start their journey if they haven't done it already. So that's really helpful. Thank you so much for joining us today, both of you. It's been a great conversation. Sorry we've kept you on air for a little bit longer, but it's interesting and I think really helpful for everybody. So thanks very much. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you all next week. Take care. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.